Hello and welcome to Steve and Dave's Behind the Curtain. This time around, we're talking about Hilly Kristal and his famous CBGB rock bar in New York City. Steve, I guess to kick it off, maybe we'll just say a little bit about the man, about his personal background.
Well, let's do. Yeah. So I know that you know a little bit more about this than I do, but he's someone who flirted with a modest amount of success as a singer, um, as a
Well,
young man. I mean,
yeah,
as a
he
young
came
man, right?
came close to signing with Atlantic Records in the late 50s.
Which was a
Um,
which was a big deal, right? The Atlantic label was
yeah,
a powerhouse label in this era.
that's right.
It's not nothing. Yeah.
Um, from there, he transitioned to working as a manager and booker for the Village Vanguard in New York, and then opened his own first bar, a cabaret called Hilly's
Yeah.
at 62 West Ninth Street. Um, that didn't go
Yeah.
very well,
It,
so he turned his attention to starting another bar in the East Village, and he opened Hilly's on the Bowery at 315 Bowery in 1969. 315 Bowery.
yeah. So we should probably say something about the Bowery and about the neighborhood, right? Because this is historically well, I mean, I mean, it's synonymous. The Bowery is synonymous with kind of tough neighborhood, kind of we'll say gritty. Some might say crime infested. That goes back decades. I mean, this was the site, of
Oh,
course, of the famous.
it goes back centuries.
Well, you're right. That's true. Yeah, yeah.
The Bowery actually predates New York City. Um,
Oh, for sure.
Goes back
This
to
is
New
New
Amsterdam.
Amsterdam. Yeah, the whole, yeah.
Um, so
It's,
this is a
it's,
very old part of the town.
it's, um, It's a very old part of the town. It has, like all parts of New York City, but particularly Manhattan, gone through various kinds of, waves of, change over time. The Bowery, though, you can see here on the map, lower part of Manhattan, between Little Italy and the Lower East Side, not that far from Greenwich Village. Um, the Hilly's establishment would be in the northern part of the Bowery, but this this has long been a tough part of New York City. And during the 70s, man, it's not, I mean, war zone is a little overstated, but
Well,
maybe just a little. It was rough. The 70s were a bad time for New York. And this was an
yeah,
unpleasant part of the
New York
city.
City was in absolute crisis mode, certainly in the early 70s anyway.
Well,
Uh,
it really was. It really was. We lose sight of this, right? But it was a city that was
Deeply in debt,
oh my
um,
God. Oh God, that's right.
all sorts
This
of
is
problems, um,
uh, they couldn't deliver services, including police services, and so it was crisis.
and there was the garbage strike.
Oh yeah.
We had garbage piled up. One of the hottest summers, a heat wave on top of that. So everything smelled, everything stunk.
Oh yeah.
Um,
This is a city
so
that
that,
experienced power outages.
yes,
It was just like apocalyptic stuff.
and this is the background
It
of
is.
the founding of
No, no, no.
CBGB.
And it adds to, I mean, everyone, in any account of CBGBs you read, um, leans into the location, right? That's a big part of this. That added ambiance, and also it was not necessarily for the faint of heart.
Uh, right. And if you were too faint to get there, you were certainly too faint to go in. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
we'll
Fair
talk a
enough.
little bit about the ambiance uh, just a bit later.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Anyway, this Hillary's on the Bowery
Yeah, right.
was a place that used to be the Palace Hotel, just a flop house. Had 105 windowless cubicles, 224 beds that you could get for as little as 285 a night, $2.85 a night.
Yeah. Uh,
Um, and when he moved his bar in there, at the base of this hotel, it was still a hotel at that time. Most of his customers were hotel clientele.
It's
Uh, so people who were staying at this dive, not the well-to-do by any means.
no, not the well-to-do by any means. It also suggests something about the permanence of these neighborhoods that people, people planted themselves, rooted themselves for decades. And so, I mean, every neighborhood had its share of old timers, including this one. And so the thing about CBGBs is that's so interesting is that it's very much of its time, right? I mean, it is sort of the zeitgeist of the 70s, as we'll talk about. But it does have a kind of foot in the past. And this is, I mean, maybe this is just maybe part of the territory when it comes to New York City, but yeah, there was something there.
Well, and far into long after it had become a popular place for people to go, you still had this clientele. You still had the
Oh
winos.
yeah. I mean, yeah.
There was no gentrification in that sense that CBGB's was driving.
Well, Dave, you couldn't. I mean, it was a rough place inside. It was a rough place outside,
Yeah.
and it's kind of remarkable that it kind of, you know, it had the kind of trajectory that it did, given the neighborhood. I mean, it's a tough
It's
place.
incredible. Yeah. Given the neighborhood and again, given the um, internal situation. Again, we'll talk about that later. But it is incredible. Yes, you're absolutely right. And there's so many things about this that are incredible. One of those things is I think he was Hilly was not a visionary. Uh, he he had a plan for
Oh,
his new bar.
Dave,
Well,
not a not a visionary, you say?
let's
Wait
talk
a
a little
minute.
bit. Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about this particular history. Um, the new bar was not doing well. It
Right,
had some
right.
financial strains. So, in order to try to bring something new and to give it a shot of life, he decided he was going to rebrand the place,
Yeah,
bring in
yeah,
some live music performances. And so he came up with the name CBGB OMFUG, standing for Country, Bluegrass, and Blues, and other music for uplifting gourmandizers.
yeah. Easy for you to say.
Yeah,
So this has always been all right. So the famous awning, and so, but but as if you would read the history, and as we sort of take it in, this was to be a kind of country bluegrass place.
country bluegrass plays. This was going to bring in some
Oh
new
yeah, sure.
clientele, give it a shot in the arm. Uh, uh, maybe also a new class of people. So that if he was a visionary in anything, it was he was going to set up a country bar middle in the middle of New York City
Fair enough. The middle of New York City,
in the
but
Bowery.
in the
And
Bowery,
this new rebranding is open. It opened on December 10th,
right?
1973. There were two basic rules.
Yeah,
Bands that worked there would have to move their own equipment in and out and play original songs.
yeah.
Um, and I guess
We
the
should,
main
yeah.
reason for the second one, uh, well, maybe you can say something about that.
Well, the main reason for the second one, was that he was cheap. That was going to be an unlicensed bar. He was not going to have a relationship with the ASCAP. And so for bars that do not have a relationship, have a licensing agreement with ASCAP, if a music act plays a cover song and ASCAP learns about it, then the bar is charged a royalty fee. And
What would that look
today,
like?
well,
Five
today,
bucks?
not $5. Today it's $750 per song. So we can, so we can assume that it's, something's similar. So the point is that a band plays two or three cover songs, and there goes the night's profit. I mean, it's just out the window.
Yeah. So if
And
you're trying to get
so
out of financial straits, that's not the solution.
now I think this has been sold, well, presented to the public that this was part of his visionary. The notion here is that, oh, we just want original music here. This is going to be a nurturing environment for artists and the clientele. We're all on the same page here. And I think that that's probably not the case.
Yeah. Um,
Probably not.
and if he had a strength, again, I don't think it was his vision. I think it was his willingness to say yes to everything. That seems to be something he says about himself. That's something
Well, yeah, I
a
think
lot
that
of other
that's
people
fair.
say. He would just say yes. He would just, yeah, go ahead. And the funny thing
I,
about it is, on the first night of the opening, he started off with a no. On the opening night, he wanted to have a roster of jazz musicians.
yeah.
But the
This is
punk, the glam punk band Magic Tramps asked them if they could perform, and he said no. They're glam punk. They're not jazz. But the band offered to build the stage if he would allow them to perform. And then he said yes. Okay, you do that, you're on the bill.
so. All right. So, okay. So how do we read this? So we read this is that he has, well, he has no idea what he's doing. He is. I mean, because it seems scattershot, right?
It
It
does
just
seem
seems like,
scattershot.
so yeah, we're
Yeah.
gonna have jazz, well, but.
Um, but I think he also had a sense that these weren't the things that mattered, right? These are not the hills he's going to die on. Uh, if I get a stage out of this, why not? And I think this why not attitude
Well,
is what carried. It allowed the random factor that created CBGB
okay, yeah, well, there's a
some
there's
room,
there's a, there's a randomness to it. There's no doubt about that.
and that's where the magic can happen. That's where
I
some creativity can take place.
and I think there's something to that as well. And so he is, I think, a beneficiary of like many people, who make it some real good fortune. It's also, I think, there's a fair amount of revisionism when it comes to sort of this era and him. That's my take. Um, but I mean, to your point, says yes to everything, and that's one of his strengths. So he gets the stage out of it, which becomes well, becomes iconic.
Yeah, this is the first glimpse that you folks are going to get of the inside of CBGB, and it is, I think, an adequate first impression.
Well, I think it's
It's
important because it gives you a sense of the scale.
yes, for one thing that the scale's important, but for another thing, my God, it's just it looks like it looks like a dump.
Well, it looks like a dump. I think it looked like a dump from the very beginning too. I don't think that it ever. I mean, it got dumpier, um, and then maybe got a little kind of dump chic over time. But it was a small venue with very dark, with pretty good sound apparently. So the sound really moved in the inside.
Great,
But this,
great, great sound system. That's something that all the artists will attest to.
yeah,
This
and
place had one of the best sound systems of any venue in New York City.
but just so we're clear though, so you're talking about then a stage that is, you know, not that wide. And so when people played, they were in close proximity with the audience and they were close proximity with each other. And so they could feel the heat and the sweat coming off of bandmates. And it was just there was something visceral about CBGBs. And
Oh,
I
and you
think you
didn't
get
reflect with the sweat of the performers. Uh,
yes, exactly.
yeah. So
Yes.
that's part of the magic, and
I totally
again,
agree.
this
Totally
is
agree.
something
Yeah.
that anyone who is there will attest to.
Yeah,
But
totally agree.
you know, it's just a success story like CBGB's, the creation of a legend, essentially.
Okay,
It's
yep.
just not something you can plan. I don't think you can. The best planning in the world is not
Well,
going to get you. It's not going to get you there. You
I
need
think right.
you need a little help from fate.
And I think in the case of Hilly Kristal, he just wanted to have a place that made a little money because
Yes,
he had been in the business for a while and he had some success, but only some success. And
and he was
he,
tired of not making money.
he was tired of not making money.
Yeah.
And so his expectation was that whatever it takes and so um, while he has this vision, this kind of curious vision about what this place is going to be, he's willing to sort of put that on the shelf pretty quickly. And I think
Yes.
that is, I mean, that's important. That's
And
to his
and and
credit.
and one of the ways that fate helped this whole thing was that he opened in December. In
Oh yeah,
August,
yeah.
a popular performance venue, the Mercer Arts Center, had collapsed in New York.
So
Killed
yeah,
four
so
people. And
we should.
the Magic Tramps that built that stage were some of the refugees who found their way to CBGB as one of the only other places that they could go. And those
So as
included bands like Suicide, The Fast, Ruby and the Rednecks, Jane County. Um,
right.
I've heard of none of them, but you also hear about a band called Television
Oh, sure.
going there. You hear about Patti Smith Group. These were two of the early pioneers in CBGB that actually ended up going somewhere,
Yeah.
especially.
So as it's described in the history of this era, bands who were on the edge did not have many venues,
Right.
which I think would surprise anyone. Um, who would, you think about New York City, think about
It's
the
New York
diversity of New York
City.
City. It's New York
Yes,
City. For God's sake, you think there'd be a bar on every corner where people could play, but that apparently was not the case.
it was not the case.
And so when you have this, I mean, literal collapse of this venue, which was, probably pretty skanky in its own way, but when that thing collapsed, it elevated CBGBs. And so in an odd sort of way, he dramatically benefits from this, right? Because this becomes everybody knows that that this is what's left.
Well,
And so bands that were here are now going to be at his place.
they were,
Right.
I guess, desperate for a
Well,
place
I
to
think
play. I mean, if you
that's
have to
the
build the
word.
stage in order to get a gig, that shows some level of desperation.
I think that's the word. Yeah. But it just isn't it odd? I just one of the things that this is one of the things that really jumped out at me as we did the research for this was that these bands had so few places to play. I would have just thought that
It
the
is.
opposite would I would have thought that had too many places to play. But
Yeah.
in fact, that's not the case. And so it's just really it's one of the big surprises. But I
Yeah.
mean, you're
So
right. In the summer, he
instead
becomes the
of bars fighting for artists, or
yes.
where are we going to get artists? It's the other way around.
Is that way? Yeah, totally.
Richard Hell of well, originally television and then the Voidoids
Mhm.
uh, said the following quote: CBGB was where I first played with my first band in 1974. And I was there week after week for 2 or 3 years with three bands in a lot of situations, and it all runs together. I was really green at the beginning. I was always looking for performance secrets, whatever I could figure out about how to play a good set. Unfortunately, one night I got so drunk I passed out just a few minutes before I had to go on stage. And then when they revived me, I played my best show ever. So of course I made a point of passing out drunk before every gig for months and months after that.
Oh, that way. That's the lesson you take from that. Okay.
That's right. This was the CBGB School of Rock. It took me forever to learn that the real secret was horse tranquilizers. Just kidding. End quote. So Richard Hell, one of the first people to play there, one of the first names that we could recognize.
Yeah, it sort of it evokes in sort of the ethos of CBGBs, right? And so it was an ethos that apparently everybody in that inside that building, whether on stage or in the crowd, sort of embraced. That this was kind of balls to the wall, maximum kind of uh, maximum debauchery on some level, and that there this was nothing was half-ass here. Everything was full out. Partying was full out. Playing was full out. Dancing was full out. The chili was full out. Um,
I don't even want to talk about the chili, but yes.
one of the missteps, perhaps, but yeah. But it's just there's just this is not again, this is a place that quickly develops a reputation. And people there must have been kind of an esprit de corps, right, of people who were there. Like
Oh, absolutely.
this is our
Yes.
place. We're your audience, and we're we're sort of all in this together, and people just embrace this very quickly. This became, I think, more than a just a venue, and that's I think one of the interesting things is that it evolved very quickly into this kind of go-to place, the happening in the Bowery of all places.
Well, yeah, and it's these people were literally just rubbing shoulders with each other. If a couple bands would play, and then that happened often, that you'd have at least two bands playing in a night, and they'd just be so close together. And as you said, a real camaraderie came about because they were doing the same thing.
Yep,
They were
yep,
all
yep, yep.
basically in the same place professionally, just up and
True.
coming bands trying to make a name for themselves. Um, and there was one of the groups was a band called the G Girls. I'm
Oh
sorry, the
yeah.
B Girls.
B girls, I
B
believe.
Girls,
Yeah, B
and
girls. Yeah.
their bassist Ross talked about the changing room at
Jeez.
CBGBs being so gross that they didn't even change there. So once they kept getting pushed back on this particular evening, and appeared after Allen Ginsberg did a
Yes.
poetry reading. But they went to so they went to ended up going to Joey Ramone's place to change, which was like literally just around the corner.
Yes.
And they put on their pajamas and went back to the club. And after Allen Ginsberg got off the stage, and they played their set. But it was preferable for them to walk a block and a half in their pajamas rather than to change in the changing room there.
Yeah. I mean, it's
Oh,
consist yeah, so consistently this is I mean, this is the one thing that comes shining through is that this place was a kind of a walking code violation, right? That they're just, it was even by New York standards, even by New York bar standards, pretty sketch. And the the only thing that was more um, off-putting to some degree, right, than the bar itself would be anything behind the scenes, whether it's the kitchen or changing rooms or the bathroom, just beyond,
or the back alley,
yeah, which became, I mean,
also
almost kind of
notorious.
notorious. Yeah, one of the
But it's where people would hang, where
well,
band members would hang.
so
There,
I mean,
there was no appealing place to do it. It just
no, but we
that
should
simple.
talk. Yeah, but we should talk a little bit about this. So this is okay. So mid '70s, punk is starting to hit full swing. Um, Not every band who played in CBGBs was a punk band, but many of them were. And if they weren't punk
or
bands,
at
they
least proto punk
or at
maybe.
least proto-punk.
Yeah,
And I think there was this sense for people who were in the punk scene that they were searching for community. And I don't want to go too far with this, but I do think that um, there were precious few places where people could feel a sense of belonging. And this became one of them. And so if it's a hot summer night outside CBGBs, the hang on the sidewalk is as important as as what's happening in the club. And so I think um, there is this sense very early that this place is it's an important place to be. Now, not every night was magical, but for a lot of people, they felt a real sense of belonging and I think a sense of ownership.
yeah. About that, a quote from Tommy Ramone. Quote, the best thing I remember from CBGB was in the very beginning. We would play pool. There was a pool table by the side of the original stage.
Yeah,
There
right.
was a lot of camaraderie. Groups like the Ramones, Blondie, Talking Heads, and Television were quite close and would always perform together. There was a friendly rivalry, but we would hang out and have a good time. End quote.
Yeah.
And these are groups that are musically actually pretty diverse,
Oh, very. I think that's right. Very diverse.
but still, when it came to
It's
hanging out, they were all right there.
they were all right there, and they all have that kind of same origin story, which is what I think also what's going on here. That they they had there was like you say a friendly rivalry. It clearly was there, but there also was I think a support as well. Although I mean, candidly, right, every group was unusual, but no group was more unusual than the Ramones. And people thought of the Ramones as well, people weren't quite sure what to think of the Ramones. Um, in their 12-minute opening set, right? But
But they were they were wildly popular, and probably
yeah, they
no
were.
group is more closely associated with CBGBs than the Ramones.
That
Uh,
that has to be the case, right? That um, whatever the Ramones are would become, it was so tightly linked to their appearances there that I think people who are real Ramones aficionados would separate every well, would separate experiencing the Ramones at CBGBs and experiencing the Ramones someplace else. And you weren't really a Ramones fan unless you heard them. I mean, there's a certain kind of authenticity there. Um, and it was aggressive and just
Balls out.
blistering, like
Just
balls out, blistering
yeah.
quick. I mean, sets did not run more than 20 minutes, even once they were an established band. It was just how fast, I mean, it was just we'd really never seen anything like it. And so CBGBs and the Ramones are just sort of they're inextricably linked. There's no question about it. And I think you wonder you wonder how well the Ramones ever really transferred out of CBGBs. I think that there was something they were the perfect band for that club. And maybe they were destined to really kind of I mean they had modest success. I mean, they were obviously incredibly influential, and I think they're really fondly thought of today. But they were just very much a kind of bar band and very much a kind of CBGB's band. So, I mean, you're to your point. I mean, these bands start at the same point, and the hang was really important.
Yeah. Their first their manager was a critic, actually, Danny Fields.
Danny Fields, yeah, Danny Fields, right, right, right.
He says, quote, they wanted to be in my column in the Soho Weekly News. And I kept saying, I can't make it. And they first played, by the way, they were first on stage on August 16th, 1974. He said, when I finally did go, I went back to the dressing room before they went on stage and said, hello, I'm Danny, and I'm here. And he went out, he said, I watched something that I had just never seen before. It
Yeah,
was um, like almost an out of body experience. And I left. I kind of left in a daze, and I was standing out on the street, and they came out and they said, um, "Well, what do you think? Do you think you can write up a review?" They said, just out of the blue, I said, "I want to be your manager."
Unbelievable.
So, and I think just because the Ramones are a group that just has an energy that in
Yes,
that venue
I think that's right.
is so direct and so immediate
I
that
think that's right.
you
This
are
is, yeah.
caught up in it. And I think that's an experience that you have to, well, probably have to be there live in a small venue
I
to
and
really understand what the
and that's
Ramones were about.
that's exactly, I think that's exactly right. And I think people who saw them weren't sure what they were watching. Some people took it as, I mean, they didn't even think it was really a real band. I mean, they thought, I mean, it was like some sort of like kind of performance art. I guess on some level it was. But to see them in that venue was just, it was transformative on some level.
And Danny Fields said, when I saw them, I walked into the dressing room and there were these four guys and they were all dressed the same. They
Well,
they had
they
often
did.
obviously made with their jeans, a t-shirt, and leather jackets. They'd often obviously made an effort to try to have the same sort of haircut.
Right,
Um,
right.
and it was just brilliant. I just thought, yes,
Well, I mean, I mean, of course, they're, yes, they're, of course, they're famous, infamous for also then embracing the surname and all that. And become a kind of a pseudo family or something. They're indistinguishable as individuals. They're the Ramones. And
and half
it's,
the time their stage performances would end in fist fights. They would just
oh
stop
yeah.
playing and start literally fighting with
Oh,
each other.
it was, yes.
It was chaotic. It was explosive. It was unpredictable.
Dee
Um,
Dee, Joey, and in particular, G.D. Jody and Johnny, just, I mean, combustible on stage. You just never knew, right? Which was, I guess, added to the allure. But I mean, to the quote, so from this poster here, you haven't seen the Ramones, you don't know what you're missing. Danny Fields, right? Soho News. Yeah, there's nothing like it. And there was nothing like this band in CBGBs.
well, Chris France tells the story because they the Talking Heads and the
Oh, right.
Ramones were somehow got thrown together in billings and things
I,
like this.
you tell me how, I mean, how, that's a, yeah.
That's just crazy. But he said, "quote Hilly asked Johnny if we could open for them, and Johnny said, 'Sure, they're gonna suck, so no problem.'" Um, that guy was mean as a snake. He was just a
Oh,
pure, unadulterated,
oh,
mean
Johnny
spirit.
Ramone.
I'm sure he had good qualities too, but they were not evident. He
Johnny
came,
Ramone.
he came
Yeah.
around toward the end, but for the longest time, he thought we sucked. They were crazy. They'd be on stage playing and they'd just stop and start fighting, end quote.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
It, um, any account of the Ramones, and we can't do it justice. We'll put some things in the reading list and the playlist,
Yeah.
but any account of them, it just is, you just, you can't believe that they did what they did. Just given their background, given their personalities, none of this really fits, but there was something about it once they hit the stage that was just extraordinary. Oh my God. But yeah, Johnny Ramone in particular, a rough customer. And there's a certain cruelty to him too. That you
Apparently,
know,
yeah, this is something that everybody attests to. So he
I mean,
was
beyond
very
just,
controlling, very dictatorial. Um, yeah,
and particularly to Joey, there was you know, there was you know, real cruelty, I think. It's real cruelty. So it's just so volatile. You just can't quite believe it. You can't
yeah.
believe it ever happened. Yeah.
I'd just like to read something by a quote from Debbie Harry, and it goes back to what we were saying about the
Yeah.
camaraderie, but I think also will be a segue to the ambiance. I think we should talk about that in a
Oh,
little
fair enough.
more
Yeah.
detail before we go on. She says, quote, "It was hard to concentrate at CBGB's because it smelled so bad. Hilly kept dogs in the back, and they used to throw up and shit indiscriminately. The kitchen was covered with grease, rats,
Dave, come on, man.
flies, maggots, and shit too. It started off with, a few drunks and a few friends. It was just like the local bar with some bikers, some Bowery guys, and then it became the place to go. It gave everyone sort of a sense of community, a sense of purpose. Some kind of mythological energy still exists. We were lucky we were there." End quote. Well,
Well,
actually,
I
that
mean,
quote was I took some liberty, put a few quotes together, so I'm not having to say quote end quote the entire time. But that's a few of the things that she had to
well,
say.
yeah, I mean, it was people understood even in the moment just how unique it was, right? That this was a special place, a special time, um, and that they were I mean, certainly Blondie benefited from it as much as anybody, right? I mean, it was very much a kind of launching pad for them. Again, very odd collection of bands to sort of emerge from CBGBs, but certainly Blondie was right there at the top. But it was,
Yeah,
it's just
Blondie, originally Angel and the Snake, um, was there from 1974 on.
yeah.
Um, Debbie Harry had also performed at CBGB's as part of the Stilettos.
Oh goodness, yes, right.
So she was pretty much one of the
You
original
should,
people.
well, okay, Dave, we should, all right. So this is, okay. So if there is if there's a female performer that emerges from CBGBs, you probably have two of note, probably Patti Smith and then Debbie Harry. And so what is it? How is it? What is it? How is it? How did Debbie Harry emerge in this way? How do you explain her appeal? And she was one of the biggest figures of the 70s. What's going on there with her, do you think? I think Patti Smith is easier to see because of, I mean, the literate piece of this, and but Debbie Harry was, I
I
mean,
think in some ways
what
they're kind
was
of
that?
opposites.
Okay.
Um, uh, Patti Smith, brooding, intense,
Brooding. Yeah. Good.
poetic, and Debbie Harry, just it's a quality we talked about before. If you're in a venue like this, you have to just put it out there and just be open and be energetic and just go for it. And I think she did. I think she had. I don't think she had
Yeah.
those barriers that keep someone from forming a rapport with an audience. I think she was
Yeah.
just that sort of performer.
So whether a tiny venue or whether an arena, she was able to connect. The Patti Smith piece of it, I think you talk about brooding, talk about the poetic. There's a real connect link between Smith and the beats of an earlier generation. Um,
Well,
and
she was friends with Sam Shepard and with
oh,
uh, well,
Mapplethorpe and
Mapplethorpe.
a whole host of avant-garde figures.
Yeah.
She Patty, yeah. So Patti Smith walked in a number of interesting circles, but Deborah Harry was flat out pop star. I mean, in the 70s, and she's probably the only person to emerge from CBGBs as a pop star. I mean Blondie slash Debbie Harry. That's a pop group, right? This is painful. No, pop group.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think that's
No, they're
apt.
they're pop. I don't have any problem with that. I enjoyed the hell out of Blondie. I think they were one of the groups that I really, really liked back in the late 70s, early 80s. Um, Still
There,
do. I think they hold up well. But
but
I
we are
think,
talking, yeah, but we are talking about, so CBGBs, it's humming every night, but there really are only a
well,
handful of,
it,
right?
I I think that's the impression that you get. I don't think it was humming every night.
So talk more
I
about
think
that then.
I think there were lots of nights where you had the old crowd, the winos and the bikers, and just there wasn't a whole lot going on. But when there was something going on, there was a hell of a lot going on. You had just wildly enthusiastic crowds. You had energized bands, and I think that's when the magic happened.
So there, okay. So you would your contention is that that there really were, I mean, because it's easy enough to see CBGBs as a kind of creation. Like in retrospect, this was like, the most important place in New York City and all that. But in point of fact, if you were there in 76, 77 or something like that, that there was, it was palpable. There would be nights where you could just feel it. You could feel like you were sort of at the center of sort of the
Well, I think
music
so.
universe.
Yeah.
No, that's interesting,
I,
right? I mean, that's
um,
interesting because I
but
tend
I
to
think
agree
there are
with you.
also nights you go in Wednesday night and you've got a few bikers and a few regulars in there and just
Yeah, just
not a lot happening.
yeah. So yeah, I bet that's right. Yeah. I mean, and how could it not be, right? Because in the end, this is a club in a scrungy part of New York City. And so, it's going to be hit and miss. Um,
But yeah, I think
yeah.
it just started off. It just started off like a rocket, right? Because
Well, it
again,
did.
you had these
Well,
refugees um, from Mercer Arts Center.
yes.
So many talented people just looking for a place to play, begging for a place to play, and so CBGB
It's,
was just the beneficiary of that.
but it changes though, right? I mean, so even, so it starts off this way. There's no question about it. But there
Well,
is a certain,
just
go ahead.
already in 1974, we had the Ramones, Blondie was already there, television, Patti Smith, the Talking Heads,
Yeah.
um, the Shirts, the Heartbreakers, Fleshtones, uh, but
But
Mink DeVille,
yeah,
names that we grew up with. I mean, name
all
acts,
true,
a
all
lot of
true,
name acts,
all true, but nobody had broke yet.
and starting their career there,
Well, that's right.
and that's pretty legendary, right?
But it also, but okay, well, as it turned out, it becomes pretty legendary, right? I mean, it is the case, right, that over through the 70s and 74 into 75 into the later 70s, the venue itself starts to become mythologized.
Yeah,
Right? It's no longer just a club. I mean, it's
right.
a club that it's a club, you read about in, in Andy Warhol's interview, or you read about in Rolling Stone, or it'll be mentioned here, mentioned there. And people, even like in Kansas, for Christ's sake, would, like, oh, CBGBs, I've heard of CBGBs, and you might have a vision of what it is, but it becomes like this
It becomes
place.
a mecca. You have
And so
people going on
this is
pilgrimages to New
this
York
is exactly
City,
what I'm getting at. Yeah.
right? To see CBG, to go to CBGB.
Candidly, disaffected youth from around the country found their way to New York City just because they thought they could find, a sense of, I mean, right, this is a thing.
Well, are you familiar with Melissa Oftenamawa?
I am not.
She she's a solo artist, but she also played in Hole, and she played with Smashing Pumpkins.
Oh, okay, sure.
And she says, "quote My first time ever in New York, I was 14, and the only two things I cared about seeing were the Chelsea Hotel and CBGB. I remember asking my father to take a picture of me outside
That,
CBGB.
that is
I
so
was too
interesting.
scared to go in.
Yeah, and I mean, I can
Then
see
in
why.
1990, I saw Hole and the Smashing Pumpkins there. The
Oh,
two
before she
great
was in the
bands I
band.
had just discovered. I snuck in, didn't have a ticket, and those were then, of course, the two bands that she was later in. I remember that night I said hello to Billy Corgan. He was talking to Courtney Love, but I was so intimidated by her I couldn't talk to her. My whole musical history is bedazzled by nights like that. Rock and roll is magic, and the temples of that magic are the venues. CBGB is the number one temple. More
Well,
13-year-olds need to discover that scene and be intimidated and be thrilled.
I
You don't
yeah.
tear down a church, you shouldn't tear this down. Of course, this is one of the testimonies
Well, yeah. This is
that
the
was
whole. Yeah, we
being given
must say.
back in 2006,
I
right?
I, just, I would be interested in your take though. and as the place becomes mythic.
Yeah.
Because this is the place that you bring a band to try to break them in New York and maybe kind of break them in America. And the story of the Police, right? Who this is the first place my understanding is this is the first place they play in the United States.
They went from the airport directly to CBGBs for their gig.
Yeah.
Okay, Sting says, quote, "We arrived in America. This was in 1978. We arrived in America from London at night in the dark and drove straight there. It was a big moment. I'd never been to America before. The streets were steaming and full of bums. Well, you
Yeah.
know where CBGB is.
Oh
It
yeah.
isn't one of the best streets. It looked very hostile. And the club is even worse. We really thought, fuck it, we've got to survive here. We got on stage and tore the place up. We played 2 hour-long sets that night, and I remember it felt like I gave an out-of-body performance. I was yelling like a banshee, suspended above the stage like my own ghost, and the band played with such furiosity. Ferocity. People seemed to like it, end quote. So that is his first impression of America.
Well, I mean, and so this
CBGB.
is, I mean, so this is the part of the whatever the mythology of the Police. It's intertwined with the mythology of CBGBs, and that this is that they deliver these sets, and that it's like a kind of um, and if you can make it in CBGBs, then you can make it anywhere kind of deal. And
Right.
it's so, but it's also this doesn't last forever. And I mean, as many interesting bands that are coming out of there. It strikes me, Dave, that the high water mark and you is 5 years, 6 years within the 70s.
Well,
I mean,
I've revised. That was my impression too. I've revised
okay,
it. I've
no, that's
revised it
just
somewhat.
all right,
Um,
okay.
because the bar continued to have big name acts. But my feeling is that after the 70s, it was starting to attract acts that already had a name who wanted to go play at this legendary venue rather than acts
Okay,
who were just
yeah.
trying to find a stage somewhere like it was in the 70s. It's my impression, but um, the quote we just heard, Smashing Pumpkins, Hole, this is 1990. This is
Yeah, these are bands with with a resume.
right. And so they
This
still
is
they still were getting the,
well,
the bands that were drawing
so
people
th
in, but
so
it was
this okay, so here this is Dave. So this is the point that I would like to get to is at some point this all changes. And if you want if you have established bands with record contracts and whatever, maybe even hits in the case of like Smashing Pumpkins, um that want to get the you baptized within CBGBs, that just seems to be very different. That seems to be a very different kind of experience for the bands, very different kind of experience for the crowds. At this and as you mentioned, you want to go to two places. I want to go to the Chelsea hotel, and I want to go to CBGBs and get your picture taken in front of it. It's great. I mean, the phrase "Graceland for punks," right? It's just like here we are. It's on everybody's bucket list now. Statue of Liberty, check,
yeah.
check. CBGBs, check. You know, Health Department after check. But that strikes me as completely different and far less authentic somehow than what we saw in the 70s.
Let me just talk about 1978. I think 1978
All right.
was another big year for the pub. This was when um, they had the Voidoids. They
Mhm.
had
Yeah.
Joan Jett and the Blackhearts. And you have to remember, Joan Jett and the Blackhearts, they couldn't get a record contract.
Well, no, I mean, because what happened to because we were interested in the Runaways after all.
Yeah.
What the hell happened to the Runaways?
So nobody was interested at that point. No one was interested in Joan Jett and the
Uh,
Blackhearts. They were still looking for a contract. The Talking Heads, And a bunch of other ones that I'm not real familiar with: the Dictators, the Misfits, the Flesh Tones, the Cramps, um, the Shirts, but also the B-52s. Uh, Fred
Made their way up
Snyder
from, yeah.
of the B-52s said the following about CBGB. He said, quote, CBGB was the second place we ever played, 1978. We were totally excited, of course. We were living in Georgia, so anything was exciting at that
Well,
point,
hell, they're from Athens. Yeah.
right? Um, CBGB was where we really started getting a following. You had to do two shows a night, and the second one was usually at 2 a.m. And by then you were usually blitzed. That was back when bourbon was my drink of choice. Whee! And of course, there was the bathroom. Everyone talks about it. My first reaction to it, one of shock. They should fix that bathroom. This might be the segue to the ambiance thing. We
Oh,
re- we
okay.
we really have
We
not
All
gone
right.
into that
We've
in
both
much
had it.
depth.
We've both had our shots. So yeah, the
Yeah.
ambiance. So I mean, so well, maybe we start with something like the kitchen,
Okay.
I guess. All right. So the kitchen was notorious. Um, well, okay. So among the things that Crystal wanted to do was to sell food. He wanted to have a working kitchen, right? And well, he didn't necessarily want to invest in what needed to happen in order to make the kitchen.
He didn't want to
Uh,
spend money at all. One of his greatest fears, he lived in fears of inspectors, of building inspectors.
so I mean, so one of the things that comes from the kitchen, which you'll see here, is the famous notorious chili, which had everything in it. And this was so the chili was famous, it had cigarette ash and rat droppings and you name it. And so the kitchen was sketched to say the least. And of course here we can see the kitchen is being used as a dressing room. But it's but the place was gross, right? And it was untended by design, in part because you're suggesting because he was cheap. And also then at some point it added to the allure that
Well, he
oh
was
you
cheap,
it
and I think he was lazy about this sort of thing. I think these just had
well he
no
was
priority for him
he
whatsoever.
was certainly inattentive.
Okay, he was inattentive.
Well, we the whole like Crystal as kind of yeah, I don't know, as a businessman and
In later
club owner.
years, in
I mean,
later
come
years,
on.
an inspector came by, and he had one of his assistants go with this inspector. And after the inspector was gone, he said, "Well, how bad is it?" And the guy said, "Well, all things considered, not too much. They think we should. They think we need vents in the bathroom." And he said, "Well, we've got holes. We've got holes in there, right?" And
Yeah,
his
holes.
assistant said, "He was talking about vents. Holes are not vents."
Yeah, holes for rats and everything else. It's yeah, so there is okay, so there's something amusing about this, and as well, yeah, amusing. I mean, it's this is part of the scene. This is part of the experience.
And I think it's part of what brings
it
people together because there's this sense of being mutual survivors of some
oh
sort of
really?
wreck. I think so. I think certainly for the bands it was that way, and I
I
think
definitely think that there was that.
yeah.
Like, yeah, that like what you suggested with Sting's horror is he like, okay, oh my God, we've got to play here. Um, yeah, they probably yeah, but but there is a sense, a kind of shared experience. For newcomers, this was almost was overwhelming. People talk about spending literally hours just walking around, looking at the walls very closely. The layers of graffiti and deathstress and all sorts of But it was like you were almost an archaeologist, right, visiting there. And you can't, so this is, in a way, this is, the inattentive nature of the management to cleanliness and anything else. I mean, it adds to it on some level. I mean, eventually I think it ends up costing them, but uh, it was quite a place. It was an experience for sure.
Well, okay, just to describe what you would see when you go in the club's interior, there was a narrow corridor with a bar
Right.
to the right, stage to the back, stalactites of grime
Yep.
dangling from the ceiling,
Right.
and as you just showed, just miles of ancient posters and graffiti all around. Um, Lenny Kaye from
Oh, for
Patti
Pat.
Smith
Yeah.
Group
Yeah.
um, said, quote, "It's like it's grown its own barnacles.
Yeah.
You couldn't replicate the decor in a million years, and dismantling all those layers of archaeology of music in the club is a daunting task," end quote. Um, Bob Gruen, a photographer of the scene, said, quote, uh, getting back to something that Debbie Harry said, quote, "Hillary had a couple of dogs that he left in there at night to
Oh God.
kind of
Yeah.
keep the place safe, but nobody walked the dogs.
Right.
So you had to be careful when you walked around the club because you might step into something.
Oh yeah. Oh, it's unbelievable.
It was a very free, open kind of place. The bands were having fun. I think the biggest goal was that maybe you'd meet a girl and then maybe you'd get a free drink, but nobody was expecting world domination. But again, the first impression is it's dirty, it's smelly, it's probably highly unhygienic.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
the way it was. That was throughout its
Well,
entire existence, apparently.
we okay. So, at some point, I think we need to think about um, what happened, right? Because it
Yeah,
didn't last it didn't last forever, and whether the high watermark of the club was just the 70s or extended into the 80s or maybe extended into the early 90s. Um, at some point, well, the rent is due.
yeah, around
Uh,
around 2000. Um,
So, okay, so the
maybe,
club had been open for over, a couple decades at this point, and was really one of the best known places. I mean, certainly in New York City, one of the best known clubs in the world. Okay,
yeah.
so it's there. So this is
So
no, okay,
so nearly 3 decades, and it's then they got into protracted dispute over unpaid rent with the landlord,
yeah, here we
Bowery
go.
Residence Committee. Now, this is the most unlikely villain that you can possibly think of. These are people who provide housing for the homeless in New York City, essentially
Right,
low rent housing. Uh, but he had problems with them because they were his landlord in this former
okay.
Palace Hotel,
Oh my God. So yeah, okay, right. They were his
and
landlord.
in fact, the Palace Hotel was one of the places where they had living arrangements for the homeless.
Right. It's the Bowery after all.
It's the Bowery, so this is all going on above the bar, and they said, you owe us a few tens of thousands of dollars
Yes.
in back rent. His argument was, well, why haven't I been billed? There was a
Oh,
time a few years ago when a girl used to come down every couple of weeks and ask for the rent, and I paid it then, but she hasn't been around for a while. The court actually said he was right. If he had not been billed, uh, he should not be responsible for that. It was crazy. But Muzzy Rosenblatt, who was the head of the Bowery Residence Committee, was so unhappy about having that whole thing. He said, looked around and said, "What are we doing in court? This isn't the sort of thing that we do."
right.
But there it was, and after that, they reached an agreement, Krystal and the BRC, that CBGB would leave in October by October 31st, 2006. So like in 6 years.
So this is the okay. So right,
And
right.
this aforementioned Muzzy Rosenblatt said, quote, "I'd love for them to stay. My wife and I, we had our first date there. We had our first kiss there,"
Yeah.
end quote. But Hilly was not an easy person to deal with, and not an easy person to get money out of.
Yeah, this is the thing. So this is so the legend of Hilly, the charming rogue. Um, you know, so it's the start of the long goodbye, right? It's the whole,
Yes,
which is, it takes on a whole life of its own in terms of
yes,
protests.
absolutely.
I mean, and as various kinds of campaigns
And
to
this is a campaign between the idealists who say it has to stay. It is an absolute landmark, and those who say a New York realty has uh, an inevitability of its own. Uh,
yes,
there's no way CBGBs is going to be able to survive that, and those people
no,
were right in the end.
that's right. Yeah, I mean, not in a gentrifying neighborhood, which is what was eventually, and this is the process. It had taken a long time, but right, that this neighborhood was gentrifying pretty rapidly. And
But there was there
but
was there was a huge mobilization to try to save
oh,
CBGB.
it was enormous,
There
global
was
in scope.
a promoter, Rocks Off, in New
Yeah.
York. They organized CBGB's final weeks of shows to book, quote, many of the artists who made CB's
Yeah.
famous, end quote. Um, Blondie played Little Steven, um, was very active, but
Oh, this is yeah, but
it was all, and there were all sorts of testimonies, including one from Tony Bennett.
I got nothing. There we
That
go.
that blew my mind. Uh, quote,
Well,
my
yes.
sons had a band called the Quacky Ducks, and they would play there in the 70s. I was always at CBGB when they performed. Tony Bennett. One night, Bruce Springsteen was there just to see what was going on. We hit it off and became very good friends.
Wow, so there we go.
But the condition of the club was a shock to me. There was still a lot of glamour and things being nice and neat and comfortable back then, but this was a whole revolution. I still haven't gotten over it. But my feeling is that they should really keep that place open and that there should be a chain of franchises around the country because there's no
Well,
better teacher for any performer than an audience. You have to be in front of people no matter how crummy the place, end quote.
well, so this is so yes. And
Tony
so
Bennett.
Tony Bennett. So this enters into the whole, so the whatever CBG's was, it is, the how it how, the effort to save it, move it to the Newark airport parts. I mean, just all sorts of
Oh, Jesus. Yeah.
crazy ass schemes just to attract, and also
Well,
just to kind of cash in. And
and
there's a
and
certain
and,
it's certain it's kind of unseemly even
and
for a place as gross as
Hilly
this.
himself had plans that I don't know if unseemly, but he wanted to move the place to Las Vegas, right? He wanted to have his new club, his new venue in Las Vegas, and Las Vegas was very interested. Of course they are.
Well, yeah, he
But he
yeah,
died
he
before,
got sick. Yeah,
yeah, before any of that could actually
I
come to
mean,
pass.
but it's so what we're left with, like, right? So CBGBs is no more.
CBGB,
The space has been, whatever. I mean, a number of things have gone in and out, and people still, get their picture taken in front of it. But it's, there's,
all right.
but
That bar and that location. Let me just say one thing about the last night, okay? Because it was a pretty big
all
deal.
right, yeah,
Um, Patti Smith of course, was one of the very first artists to play there.
right.
Um, but 2 weeks before they were scheduled to absolutely close down, October 15th, 2006. The club closed with a performance by Patti Smith that was
Wow.
broadcast live on Sirius satellite radio. And she said, quote, CBGB is a state of mind. There's new kids with new ideas all over the world.
Sure.
They'll make their own places. It doesn't matter whether it's here or wherever it is, end quote.
Yeah. Well, that's
She took the stage at 9:30, played for 3.5 hours, helped on some songs by Flea, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and by television's Richard Lloyd.
yeah.
Um, and nearly finished, Smith and the band played Gloria, alternated the chorus with echoes of the Blitzkrieg Pop by the Ramones. Hey, ho,
This
let's
is
go.
this is wistful.
Yeah. And then her encore was Elegy, where she named the musicians and other music figures who had died since playing at CBGB.
Well,
And then the awning was taken down and moved to the lobby of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Cleveland.
there we go. And and where it should be, right? Where it should be. And that's
Since then, 2010, CBGB Radio, 2012, CBGB Music Festivals, uh, large free concerts, Times Square, Central Park. The first one on July 7th, 2012. They showcased hundreds of bands and venues across the city and premiered dozens of rock and roll movies in theaters around Manhattan. 2013, CBGB's original building, 315 Bowery, was added to the National Register of Historic Places
as it should be.
with the following explanation, quote, CBGB was founded in 1973 at 315 Bowery in a former 19th century saloon on the first floor of the Palace Lodging House. The legendary music venue fostered new genres of American music, including punk and art rock, that defined the culture of downtown Manhattan in the 1970s and that still resonate today. In this role as cultural incubator, CBGB served the same functions as the theaters and concert halls of the Bowery's storied past. The former club, now occupied by a retail-based business,
Right.
remains a pilgrimage site for legions of music fans, end quote.
Well, there we go.
But CBGB's is closed, but we still have the name, right? It's still a brand that's being used, although it has nothing directly to do with the actual CBG. And you mentioned the Newark, the bar at the Newark
Yeah,
airport.
for a while. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Um,
It's CBGB, yes. CBGB's is always a brand though.
yes.
I mean,
Well,
it's all we have now, it's long been a brand. And so, I mean, is it I yeah, you
and
so
I don't know if it's a shame that Hilly was unable to capitalize on that, like I'm sure he would have liked. I
well,
guess he was worth around 3 million when he died. So, you know,
I think he's he's incredibly fortunate. I mean, right place, right time. He just suggested. He said yes
right
to
place,
lots of
right
things.
time. Yeah,
But he's a fortunate guy. But there's always a measure of good fortune in any success story. And so I think his is on balance a success story, as is CBGB's. But a fascinating locale.
yeah. There was just an alignment of planets there somehow that led to a combination of factors that I just yeah. Again, I don't think you can plan for. I think it's just something
I think that's right.
that happens, and this is the sort of thing we see in music history all the time. Just
Yeah, for sure.
lightning
Yeah,
strikes. Yeah,
that lightning did strike. So super interesting. Well, Dave, what do you think? You can take us home?
sure. If you enjoyed this episode, and we hope you did, you can subscribe to Steve and Dave's right here. You'll want to be sure to check out the playlist. We're going to have some of the performances from CBGBs on that. Check that out right here. And you can check out another one of our Behind the Curtains episodes right up here.
You bet. And keep in mind that we are posting new content on Blue Sky every day. So check us out on Blue Sky. And well, so until next time, we'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.